Well, welcome to everybody. Good afternoon. Great to see you all here. This is part of a speaker series hosted by the New England National Science Foundation ICorps node. We'll have additional speakers regularly. Watch for those announcements. First off, I'd like to thank the ICorps sites at the other schools in New England and make sure that you're aware of them. All offer NSF ICorps customer discovery training. The ICorps program was actually created by the folks in the NSF SBIR group. So if you're a researcher considering a deep tech startup, the NSF ICorps program can probably help you. If you're at a school that has an ICorps site, they may be offering a course, so you should check with them. But the New England ICorps node at MIT also offers customer discovery training regularly. So if you're from MIT or from a university that is not a site, or if you are one that has a site and somehow the schedule does not work for you with the programs they have, you can enroll in one of our regional short courses. They're all virtual. They're 3 weeks long. We run them approximately twice a month. One kicked off a couple of weeks ago. The next open courses start March 22nd, and you can see the dates there. For more info or to apply, just go to the website or email us. And that's it for the infomercial part of the program. So SBIR and STTR awards are a really important funding source for deep tech startups. Even better, these are non-dilutive funding. I think 11 different government agencies give out SBIR awards, and I think 5 or 6 give out STTRs. Each agency is a little bit different. Today, you're going to hear from a National Science Foundation SBIR STTR program director about how it works at the NSF. In my opinion, NSF is one of the most flexible, especially in terms of what kind of projects get funded and what stage those projects are at. So a couple of quick housekeeping comments. Ben's going to talk about how those programs work at NSF. He'll take questions at the conclusion of his comments. We will make copies of the slides available, so no need to write everything down that you see on them as you go along. We'll pop them into chat as a copy of the PDF copy as Ben completes his comments. If you have questions for Ben, please put them into the Q&A. You should see the Q&A option on your Zoom menu choice there. So, well, I'd like to introduce Ben. Ben Schrag has a large portfolio of these awards, and he's very familiar with the ICorps program as well. He is a senior SBIR STTR program director and also policy liaison. He joined the NSF as a program director in 2009, leading the Advanced Materials Instrumentation Group. Prior to NSF, he himself was a part of a young startup that commercialized a new family of high-performance magnetic microsensor products, right? And he was also the PI on a number of federal grants and contracts, including NSF Phase 1 and Phase 2 SBIR projects. He received his PhD in physics from Brown. So his background is a lot like many of you. He really understands firsthand the challenges you face because he's been through them. So I'll let Ben take it from here, and you can take over the screen sharing anytime you'd like.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and welcome everybody. I appreciate everybody's time today. As People's Day is winding down, as Roman mentioned, I am a fellow New England graduate who jumped from a student role into a startup about 20 years ago. And unfortunately, I didn't have ICorps, and so I made a lot of mistakes that Roman and his team would probably have been able to talk me out of. And so I'm hoping that the ICorps experience and the ICorps network is something you're all leveraging. It's an incredible resource. And as you could probably guess, we at NSF are very proud and understand the power of that experience. Let me share my slideshow. Hopefully you've got that. You've got the slideshow and not the notes. Is that right? Roman, can you give me a thumbs up on the slides?
We're still waiting to see. Double click enter full screen.
Okay, maybe I just hung for a second. Let's see if it comes now.
That may be what happened to me. Just kind of step out and try it again.
Okay, you're not seeing it now?
Oh, there it is.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what the issue is there, but hopefully it's not my VPN popping off. All right, so you've got it now?
We do. Very good.
Great. These are very light slides, by the way, everybody. I'm happy to send you decks of whatever level of detail you're looking for. I try to keep it pretty light here today. I'm going to talk more than I'm going to show, but I'm happy to dive in more deep. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Small Business Innovation Research Program. I'm going to focus mostly on the NSF, but assuming that many of you are not familiar with this program in any form, let me just mention, as Roman said, this is a program that you'll find scattered across the US federal government. It does exist at a number of federal agencies, and the way to think about it is that any agency that funds research to outside institutions has this program, if there's any scale to that research funding program. And so there are 11 agencies that do this, but in case it makes things a little more manageable, there's 5 agencies that account for about 97% of the budget, so the 5 big agencies. And those agencies are the NSF, the Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Energy, and NASA. And so you can probably have heard of all those agencies, and you can understand that other than NSF, all of them have a pretty clear topical or domain focus. And obviously, in most cases, your startup having a technology that aligns with those agencies' kind of technical focus is a really important thing to think about. The downside is that you have to learn about each agency, essentially, at least process-wise, from scratch. These are all agencies that are going to give you, as Roman mentioned, non-dilutive funding. The government is never going to take an active board seat, an equity stake in your company. We are there to provide funding and support, but not to actually get deeply involved in the management of your company. The government also, as you can probably expect, is going to deal with you through a document. And so whichever of these programs you apply to, with very limited exceptions, you're going to have to prepare for the creation of a pretty extensive discussion of your technology and your commercial position in the market. And you're going to have to anticipate, in most cases, a pretty significant waiting time. And so these programs are great. I'm a big fan of them, but they are typically something that should not gate other things that your startup might be wanting to do. And they are things that may be a part of your funding strategy, but are generally not the entirety of it. We're not going to pay for things forever, typically, and we're not going to pay for everything you need to do. We're only going to pay for technical R&D. So that's my kind of very quick summary of the broad federal SBIR program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Science Foundation. That is the program where I work, and it's also the only program where my startup was able to attract funding because we were working in an area that didn't fit any other agency. So I'm very thankful for this agency for helping my company get off the ground as well. So to give you a sense of scale, our program spends a little less than $250 million each year. We give that out in the form of grants. Again, it's a non-dilutive instrument, and it's going to go to a small business somewhere based in the US that is for profit. Our goal at NSF is to help very early stage startups, typically pre-seed stage startups, prove out their deep technology, their new innovative, risky deep technology innovations, very focused on that path toward commercial impact. And so the effort that we're going to support is technical R&D, usually prototyping, proof of concept, feasibility demonstration, that is really put into a frame of what the market needs, right? So the ICorps was developed, as Roman mentioned, by the same team, by folks in my program, as a way to kind of crystallize the appropriate research that makes the most sense to achieve the commercial goals that your company is looking to achieve. And obviously, ICorps gives you another method to attack the non-technical risks involved in creating your company. Our program is centralized, and so there are a dozen program directors who work for NSF and spend our days and many times our evenings working on this program. Each of us has a different portfolio area. Portfolios are typically organized into very broad topical areas. So my colleague Anna, she'll be handling energy technologies. My colleague Murley will be handling robotics. My colleague Henry Ahn will be handling biomedical technologies and so on. You don't need to remember who matches to who. We have a way to get you in touch with the right person. But the important thing to know about these folks is that what they do all day is they try to work with companies to select companies that they think are the most promising to fund, and then work with those companies to help them be successful. And so it is something where the folks do this because this is the thing that they're very focused on and they want to really use as a way to impact the world. So all of us have a lot of passion for what startups are capable of doing. We also all have the kind of dual-sided experience that many of you have, where we have deep technical, typically expertise that is grounding the technology around which the startup is built. And we also all have experience in the places where you all sit as entrepreneurs and as investors in deep technology startups. So you'll find the program directors are very much empathizing with the challenges that are faced by these kind of incredibly important but incredibly risky new startups. I mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead, Roman. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just saw in the chat that I do see the slides changing. Are people's, I see a comment that someone made that they're not showing up.
Okay.
Harsha, can you see them now, Harsha?
That was before he changed his slide.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm only on the second slide here. I'll let you guys know when I'm changing the slide, and if it doesn't, if you don't see the screen change, please let me know. But I only have 7, so there won't be a whole lot of slides to digest here. Our awards that we give are intended to be as flexible as possible. Again, the goal is to do R&D that is most maximally important to realize a commercial vision, to solve a problem in the market. And so the grant mechanism is the one we use typically because that gives us the most ability to let you pivot if needed during the conduct of the award. And this is a phased process. It's really technically two phases, but in many cases, the second phase can have stages as well. And the first phase is about $250,000. It's actually 275K right now. The second phase starts at $1 million and can go up to closer to 1.5 million, and we can talk about that as well. But going through this whole process, many companies end up closer to the total of $2 million of non-dilutive funding. And so for many of you, that'll get you pretty well started on the technical de-risking of your technology, but for most of you, you'll require more, and for some of you, much more money just on the technical side to get to a commercially proven product. Let's put it that way. I'm going to go to my third slide here. Hopefully this flips over. I've mentioned we focus on pre-seed stage companies, startups, and here's some data to show that in concrete numbers. Basically, most of our companies are a few years old, have a few employees. These numbers are probably actually an understatement. These data tend to go up over time. Most of these companies that we fund have never gotten SBIR funding, at least to phase 2, from any agencies. So we typically are funding companies that are new to this process of writing grants. And so don't let that part scare you. It is cumbersome, but it's not typically a big barrier to getting funded. It just creates, you have to commit some time to do it. And then on the bottom, again, first-time submitters are welcomed. We are the only agency that I know of in the federal government of any kind of granting agency where the success rate for first-time applicants is actually higher than success rate for everyone else. And so we try to be very open to new folks. One thing I will say, and I don't have a slide on this, but even though we are funding companies at these very, very early stages, which would imply even higher risk and higher chance of failure, the earlier you fund, the more risk there is. Our companies have had incredibly strong commercial results. I don't have all the data points here, but I do know that over the last 6 years, our program has put about $1 billion into our portfolio. Over the same time period, our portfolio companies have raised about 14 billion in follow-on private capital. And so that's a 14-to-1 investment multiple, again, for very risky technology-based companies. And so we have an incredible portfolio. Last I checked, we have, in the last 5 years, we have 34 companies that got funding in the pre-seed stage from us that are now valued at least $250 million of 34 companies like that in our portfolio. So yeah, we have a lot of really high potential companies, and we have some companies that are maybe a little older that have become brand names that you definitely have heard of as well. So it's a program that has a pretty strong correlate with strong commercial outcomes. All right, going to my next slide. So for any investor, you all need to ask the question about how do you figure out if you're a good fit and whether you should move forward. Going through ICorps is a great correlate, honestly, with being a good fit for our program. We created it because it is the best thing that we know of to attack the biggest kind of unforced error that we have seen in our portfolio over the years, which is that you're going to maybe make the technology work, and yet you are going to fail as a company because you don't significantly understand the market, or you're basically building something that there's no real critical need for. So the most important thing is that we pay for R&D. So if your company has a product where the technology is more or less proven, maybe you need to do engineering, maybe you need to do optimization, but without that big, risky, unproven technology, you're typically not a good fit for us at the phase 1 level. We need to see the potential for technical failure. If the technology is definitely going to work, then what you probably need to do is less R&D and more engineering. We need to see that your technology is innovative, and that really means typically 2 things. It means that it's a different way of doing things than what else has been done, or at least what else has been successfully done. And, is not just different in kind of by degree, but typically different, really dramatically different of what other people have done to solve the same problem. Usually along with that, in many cases, you get a degree of defensibility, which is to say, because it's new and different and hard to pull off, if you pull it off, it will create defensibility for your company. It will create a moat where you can stop other folks from copying what you're doing. And sometimes that moat materializes in the form of patents, sometimes trade secrets, sometimes other things. But one of the best things about having a deep technology company is that if you get the technology across the finish line in terms of making it work, you have a really big advantage in kind of pulling the drawbridge up behind you. We're really looking for companies to aggressively commercialize. The important thing, if you apply to our program, is that the project you're bringing us is aligned with a commercial vision, and that the commercial vision is the #1 thing that gets you up in the morning as a company. We're not looking to fund pet projects, side projects. We want your company to be really laser focused on commercialization. Now, you may not know exactly who your first customer is or your first market, but you need to have in your heart that the thing you're trying to do is to get this technology into the market to solve problems. And again, the last thing here is, again, in the spirit of ICorps, we're looking for some sense of data around the market. And that means typically engagement with customers and stakeholders. So whether that's ICorps or whether it's something else like it, even before you start to do any work on the technology, we want you to have done some homework on first order understanding that there might be a problem that you think you might be able to solve, obviously contingent on technical success. Okay, I'm going to throw out a few things not to worry about because there's a lot of SBIR programs that are very different than ours, and a lot of them, if you take the advice that applies to them, you may not be best suited for us. We really look at a lot of these things very differently. Don't worry about topics. Topics really are technology areas that the agencies are interested in. We have topics, but we basically we don't use them to restrict anything. There's no topic that another agency is going to support that NSF won't support, from my experience. So we'll find a place for you if the innovation and the commercial focus is there. Is my project of interest to NSF? Again, we're investors. Investors want to fund great entrepreneurs. They want to fund successful companies. That's what makes your project of interest, not necessarily the specific widget you're building or the problem you're solving, although problems that have big positive societal impacts are especially interesting to us. How do I build my budget? I've never submitted a grant before. What if I make some minor error? These are all things that typically don't actually affect outcomes very much. We sometimes will need to help fix any administrative issues or mistakes in the budget, but we'll fix them if we need to, and they don't actually typically end up changing the outcome of the funding process that we have. And finally, you know, my lead investigator does not have some X archetype. Now, don't get me wrong, we're the National Science Foundation, we're funding R&D, technical R&D. We want to see that the team that is coming forward has a pretty strong collective background to do the research that you're proposing to do. Usually that research is risky, and so it's important to have a really strong case that you're able to potentially pull it off. But we're not looking for any specific chaired professors or publication record. You know, most of the PIs of our programs are very early career. They're typically many times straight out of a degree program. They don't have to be, but there's plenty of folks who can make that background work. And so you don't need to have any level of, say, career seniority or existing academic position to be the PI on one of our projects. Going to my 6th slide here. We have a quick fit way to gauge fit with our program called the project pitch. This is something you have to go through anyway to apply, and so you can do it now or you can do it later, but eventually you'll have to do it if you want to participate. This is basically a 3-pager about what you think you might want to apply for. It really focuses on the differentiated innovative technology and the specific problems or work you're trying to do with NSF funding. These are accepted through our website anytime. They're evaluated on a rolling basis and typically in a few weeks. And if you're invited, you'll be getting a response from the program director, who is the person who will lead the review of your full proposal and will eventually make the funding recommendation. So you'll know where you fit, you'll know what topic you fit in, and you'll know who the person is to ask questions. If you're not a good fit, we'll also tell you you're not a good fit, in which case you cannot apply. But we'll give you reasons why, and you can come back later if you feel like you can fix the things that made you not a good fit and submit a new project pitch thereafter. And we actually now, I haven't updated the slide, but we actually have now posted a solicitation, which is how we tell you how to submit a full proposal. I don't need to worry about that yet, but the solicitation for 2022 is now out. And the next deadline for full proposals is in June, if that helps to plan. So I encourage you to submit the project pitch. You don't actually have to have formed your company or have gone through any government registrations to do so. It's a fairly lightweight, fairly low learning curve type thing. So please feel free to take advantage of that when you're ready. And that's all I have. I'll throw out my email address and I'd love to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a few questions that are in Q&A. I'll kind of go through those. Please, everyone, any thoughts that you have, please put them in. So first question, can you give an idea of the technical feasibility indication that you're looking for in a company of interest?
So it's a great question. The goal of the phase 1 project really is the term that they use is feasibility demonstration, and obviously there's some differences in terms of what that means. There's different levels of feasibility, but typically speaking, you can be a good fit for our program with a pretty early stage idea. In some cases, maybe you don't even have a proof of concept yet, and so. In terms of what you need to come into the process with, it's kind of hard to be too early for us, unless, of course, you haven't started to get your head around what you think the nail you're going to hit with your hammer, right? If you haven't done some sense of market customer discovery. But technologically, we have folks who just come in and say with an idea, and sometimes that's enough. If the question is related to what feasibility at the end of phase 1 looks like, what would the goal be in phase 1? That is something that is best evaluated through this project pitch process. One of the questions that we ask in the project pitch is, tell us what technical challenges you're going to try to overcome if you get the phase 1 funding. What are you going to pay for? What are you going to accomplish with the funding? And the program director will oftentimes have feedback on that. But typically at the end of phase 1, we want you to have thoughtfully thought about the biggest technical risks that are in the way of your product working. Technical risks meaning this product might not work, right? You don't necessarily have the right amount of money to get to all of those in phase 1, but we want you to tackle the top ones, the most risky ones first, and kind of go down the list to whatever extent you're able to do so. If you're building a new pharmaceutical, you're certainly going to have technical risk all the way through phase 1, phase 2. I mean, that's kind of a given. Sometimes with the software products, you may be able to get technical risk mostly out in phase 1. So there's a lot of variability based on the field, but the best way to figure out what makes sense in your field is to submit the project pitch, and then if you need to, engage the program director who responds to your project pitch in that conversation.
Great, thank you. I think the next question is it's a two-parter, and I think it is drilling down a little bit more into what you talked about, who can be the PI. So first part of the question is, must the PI have a PhD? And the second is, should there be a relevant publication history?
Yeah, so the answer to both of those is no. Publication history, depending on the project, somebody on the team having demonstrated expertise in the research area that you're proposing can be helpful. It's not necessarily the case that publications are the only way to show that, and it depends a little bit on kind of the nature of the technology area that you're working in. There are some technology areas that almost like anyone who can pull off a certain research project might have a PhD, just because that's how you get trained to do that sort of thing. So I'm thinking of genetic engineering, things like that. Not a lot of people who get genetic engineering without going through an advanced degree program. Maybe there are, but you could think about some software projects. Not as many software engineers need to get a PhD to do groundbreaking work in the field, I think. So I think it depends a little bit. There's definitely a check for technical acumen of the team as a whole. If you don't have that as part of your small business directly, we encourage you to think about partnering. A lot of our projects are partnering with universities. A lot of our companies are spun out of universities. And so sometimes if you need to get access to expertise, technical expertise or facilities, working with the university and having them work on part of it would be the way to go. But I think the general sense about the rigidity with which people think they need to kind of fit into a certain box to be the PI, I think that tends to overstate how rigid our process is. I think we're more flexible than people think about who can be a good PI.
Okay, great. There's a question about the citizenship or visa status of applicants.
Sure. Yeah, so the eligibility, I glossed over. I did mention that there is a eligibility check on the company itself. So that company has to be for profit, has to be has a place of business in the U.S., has to be a small business, which is less than 500 employees, and then has to be U.S. owned and operated. And the way that works is about the ownership and control of the company. The company has to have at least 51% of the ownership and 51% or more of the control in the hands of U.S.-based citizens or permanent residents. So if you can build that kind of majority in naturalized citizens or in green card holders or citizens, then you're eligible. So that's the eligibility on the company. As far as people working on the project, the only thing that matters for people working on the project is they have to be legal to work, right? So they'd have to be either a citizen, a permanent resident, or have an appropriate visa during the project to be able to work and be paid by the company as an employee of the company.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
If you already have patents, does that mean you've already progressed too far to participate in your early stage feasibility?
No, absolutely not. Patents can mean very different things, but there's plenty of cases where you can have a patent and still have a product that is nowhere near feasible, right? Nowhere near demonstrated as doable, right? And you can still have a lot of risk that the patent can be reduced to practice in the way that the market demands, right? To fulfill the need in the market. So yeah, we have lots of companies that come in with patents under their belts. We have lots of companies that come in with nothing under their belt. So I don't think there's any one size fits all there.
And right. So if you're turned down on your first grant, I assume your first proposal, do you need to provide a new project pitch for a resubmission?
Typically, yes. If you submit a proposal, we do use the external peer review process, kind of a modified version to review these proposals. And so if you submit a full proposal, unless there's some big administrative issue, most of those proposals do go through this external review where we'll bring in experts to give us feedback and to give you advice. If your project does go through that process, does not get funded, then you do need to submit a new project pitch. It could be for the same project, that's absolutely fine. And in reality, a project that was a good fit, say a year or two ago, is almost always still a good fit. But we like to have the project pitch happen again because that gives us one more kind of beat where we can have a dialogue about the resubmission and to try to make sure that you understand things you'd have to worry about and address to make the proposal stronger.
Is there a conflict of interest if the PI is married to the CEO of the startup? For example, if both the husband and wife are part of the company?
I mean, so there's a conflict of interest for your company, potentially. There's not necessarily a conflict of interest for us, right? So for our point of view, the conflicts of interest that we are worried about are around the decision makers who allocate funding. So if two people work inside the company, they're both just working as company employees or founders. They're both on the same part of the budget. They're both pulling in the same direction. There's not technically a conflict of interest there because the money is, they're theoretically not conflicted. There's only one interest that they're both serving. If you had, for example, a case where the CEO of the company was giving a subaward to their spouse who was a university professor, then that subaward could potentially be conflict, because then the question is the subaward being directed to that institution because it's the best thing for the company and the best thing for the project, or is it being directed based on the personal relationship? And we can talk about all those things, but the conflicts for us, typically, the ones that we have to work through legally, typically have to do with relationships between the company and some outside entity that is getting funding. But there is a concern that we definitely think about, that many investors, I'm sure you understand, think about around people on the team who are related in some way. And broadly speaking, the issue there is that if we have two people on the team and they're married or related, the question will be, when they're making a decision, are they making it because they both think it's the best interest of the company, or is that relationship they have coloring their decision-making process? So that doesn't necessarily funnel into any of the tactical elements of our process, but for any investor, it does create a tiny bit of, something to watch, right? It's not necessarily a red flag, but the more the kind of these other relationships come into the company, the more you start to worry in some sense about decision making from those folks. So I don't think we probably have as much of a dogmatic approach to these issues as outside private investors do, but a corporate structure that we look for, the way that equity is deployed, the way that structures are organized, the way that governance works, that's going to be pretty fluid in the early stages of a startup. You don't necessarily have to have a huge structure for that, but we are looking to see that you're building the company in a way that is according to the best practices of startups, partly because we've seen companies fail because of conflicted relationships. And also, most of our companies are going to have to raise outside funding during and after our award. And if you're in a place where something about the structure of your company is going to make that harder, it makes the chance of your eventual commercial success lower. So I wouldn't stress about it too much, but I do think building your team and allocating your equity and your roles in a good way is a really important thing you can do, typically right away, if possible, to be stronger in terms of being able to get funding from us.
And most, if you have a relationship with the university or even an alumni group with the university, there's often resources you can tap into to talk through those things with, for example, at MIT, we have the venture mentoring service. So if you're an MIT alum, you could get some advice on those kinds of things, on how investors look at it. So it's something you want to talk through with other people and make sure you're, understand.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I want to develop a solution in conjunction with an agency that has an SBIR program. Should I apply to their SBIR program or should I apply to the NSF?
So you could theoretically do both. Nothing's stopping you from applying to multiple agencies. If the work that you're seeking funding for is overlapping in the multiple proposals, then you couldn't theoretically accept more than one. We don't fund things that have actual overlapping tasks in them. But you could make the two projects separate, and then you could accept both of them. As far as working with another agency, I would say if the agency is the main customer for the project, it probably makes more sense to go directly to them themselves. You said you're working with them. I'm not sure if that means as a customer. If you're just working with them in the sense that they provide some kind of expertise or technical competency or facilities that you need, but the customer is somewhere else in the world or wherever, then I think applying to NSF makes a lot of sense as well. And I think one of the ways that people think about the very oversimplified version about how to think about NSF versus other agencies, from what I've heard from my portfolio companies who've worked with lots of agencies, is that we tend to be the first agency who's willing to take a shot. We tend to be the earliest funder. If you get funded by multiple agencies, we're almost never second. We're usually first because we're looking for the really risky early stage stuff. And we're also, again, we're also willing to kind of accommodate pivots probably a little more than other agencies, partly because some other agencies they're interested in funding you, not just because of your kind of commercial chops, but because there's a specific product you're building that they're actually interested in, or a specific problem you're trying to solve. And if the agencies got their heart set on that product or their heart set on that problem that you're solving, then if you happen to want to pivot away from that as a company, it's a problem, right? The agency is not going to let you. We don't. We try to be agnostic on those fronts so that you have the ability to pivot away from them. But I would encourage you to explore multiple agencies. As I mentioned, we're not going to keep supporting you for very long, and so somebody else will have to pay the bills typically before too long. And so there's no reason you can't think about other agencies to do that. One example is that. For example, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and the NSF have a huge overlap in our portfolio because about a third of our portfolio is in the life sciences area, and almost every one of those companies would potentially be NIH appropriate as well. So there's a lot of overlap there, and typically there's like a 2 to 3 year gap where we fund a company and then a few years later NIH will fund it.
Yeah, and there are numbers of agencies where they allow you to actually even really submit essentially the same proposal for the same work to more than one, but you do have to disclose it, I think.
Yeah, you should always disclose to every agency about every other agency. Once you do that, you're most likely going to stay out of trouble. But yeah, that's true. You can submit the same proposal. There's a lot of one-off bureaucracy, not a lot. There's some one-off bureaucracy on some of the supplemental things around a proposal, but the heart of the proposal can be very similar. So you can save a little bit of time that way.
Right. Well, maybe I'm going to read this. I'm not sure I get the question, but maybe you do, because you've probably heard a lot of these before. So, so it's a follow-up on the feasibility question. What does it look like if a technology is too feasible? In other words, not risky enough?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it looks like the way that I look at this, and I think this is a very context dependent based on the program director. So hence the project pitch, which is laser focused at this issue. The way I think about this is that if you can tell me, given enough time and money, I'm sure this technology will work in a way that's needed to serve the market we're looking at. If you can say that, then at phase one, then it's probably not risky enough for me. There's got to be some showstopper that is not just about time and money, but about the limits of the science or the physical world that you're running into. And again, that is something that is typically taken in context of what you need to do to serve the customer. So to some extent, you kind of need to know something about what the customer needs to be able to start gauging the level of risk that is appropriate to us. But this is the most hard to wrap your head around. This is the single most hard to kind of manage or try to comprehend aspect of our program for new applicants. And so I would encourage you to have that conversation with the detail attached with the program director in the field, because I'm funding, say, new spectroscopy instruments, whereas, my colleague Peter is funding, cybersecurity platforms. And it's just a very different, feasibility means a very different thing in different areas.
So if your pitch is rejected with, say, a reason for it not being sufficiently high risk, you can reach out to a program director and try to understand it, because some people maybe just did not write it well, even in the pitch, correct?
Yeah, you can reach out, and any pitch that's not invited will be given a specific reason. We only have a certain fairly limited number of reasons we're allowed to say no to a pitch, and in addition to that, there will usually be some additional color around the reason that, explaining why. But you're welcome to reach out to the program director and discuss it. I mean, we invite more than half of all the pitches we get, and the vast majority of the ones that we don't invite are not invited for one of three reasons. Number one, you're not eligible. We have a lot of companies that literally are not American, that are not for profit. We're not allowed to fund those. That's a congressional mandate for us. So number one, you're not eligible. Number two, this issue about the technology being too proven or not risky enough, or that something about the innovation maybe was risky once or innovative once, but it's kind of been proven out and it's kind of more ho-hum by now. And then the third thing is basically that the money that you're looking for us to give you and the things you're going to try to do to spend it just are not appropriate. They're not R&D goals, or they're not commercially focused, and they're not the kind of the things that we're allowed to pay for, basically. So those are 98% of the pitches that don't get invited are for one of those three reasons.
Okay. So there's actually a question in chat that I'll refer to. Just spotted it. So you spoke briefly about how the money could be used, that it's mainly for R&D. The question asks, how about the salaries of the team?
Yep, salaries are the biggest single cost that we pay for when we pay for R&D. Salaries for people to do the research. We pay for basically all of the typical costs that you would associate with a research team doing R&D. Salaries, we pay for the associated fringe benefits for the employees. We pay for consultants, if that's the better way to engage somebody. We'll pay for materials and supplies, access to computers and facilities, services from providers, machining, computing, prototyping, and we'll pay for the indirect costs on top of all that. And then we'll also pay you a fee. We'll give you a profit that you basically get to keep and do whatever you want with. It's a 7% of your award, but so it'll add up to something on the order of 15 to 16 to 17,000 for your phase one award. But yeah, we find that the budgetary rules are pretty flexible in terms of paying for things that are needed to do R&D, no matter what type of R&D you're doing.
So here's someone that's getting ready to apply for the national 7-week ICorps program. And would you encourage them to submit their pitch before they do that, before they complete that, or afterwards?
I mean, it's a little hard to tell about if they're coming into this having done no customer discovery, having no foot in the market, then I definitely would wait. If you've done a little bit of maybe a regional ICorps program with fewer interviews, then you can definitely submit your pitch. I mean, the worst thing that happens if you submit your pitch is you're basically told you're not a good fit, and you can resubmit the pitch. You typically have to wait a few months to resubmit. So even if you submitted now, probably by the time you finish the ICorps program, you'd probably be able to resubmit anyway. So there's probably not a lot of downside to submitting now, but it's definitely true that the pitches can be stronger just having gone through ICorps, and certainly the proposals can be much stronger as well. So if the question was, should I wait to submit my full proposal until after I go through ICorps? My answer would be probably yes, unless you've already really gotten on top of customer discovery. But the pitch is not as much about customer traction. It's about appropriateness. So it could go either way.
Okay. So I'm going to read a question here, but I'm going to take the first stab at the answer, and then you could kind of
Sounds good.
correct me where I'm wrong.
Okay.
So the question is, I thought that NSF lineage and participation in ICorps was helpful in getting your proposal selected. However, the pitch form doesn't ask for any of that information. Is it only relevant after the pitch has been selected? So I'm going to say my answer is that participation in ICorps in and of itself is not what matters. It's really what you learn, the lessons learned during ICorps, and the ability to now use the language and refer to some evidence of customers that you've talked to that support the things that you're talking about. Those being able to present that information in your proposal increases your odds of acceptance against those people that can't do that.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. That's perfect, Roman. That's absolutely right. And
Okay.
yeah. I think the lineage question. Let me just add a little bit of comment on that. Yeah, NSF lineage by itself isn't actually it's not a huge impact. It has nothing to do with the pitch, and it has very little to do with the proposal. Having lineage to a university can indicate technical competency and technical experience, right? So that can be good. But in the same way that lineage per se doesn't add value, the same way that ICorps, just going through ICorps, it doesn't help if you don't actually do it right. It doesn't help if you don't learn something and translate the customer engagement into insight. Same way that if you have lineage, if that lineage means that you've gained technical skills, technical resources that you can leverage to get the project done, then that's good. But just having the NSF stamp of lineage on it without anything else is not necessarily helpful.
Okay, great. Now let's see. Is there any advantage for a proposal being owned by disabled owned business person?
Yeah, so one of the goals of the SBIR program writ large, and one of the goals of the NSF, is to broaden participation among all of our programs. And one of the ways that we broaden participation is to try to basically engage communities that are underrepresented. That includes, genders, racial backgrounds, and disability backgrounds as well. And so it is something that we consider, and we try to balance geographies, right? We try to get folks from smaller ecosystems involved. So all of that is definitely part of our decision. The issue with this case would be that there's no data point, there's no checkbox to indicate that you are a disabled founder, for example, or disabled owner. And so, you're welcome. You're not required to say that, but obviously, in order for that to be weighed, you'll have to actually bring that up, right? And so, there is a section of the proposal about the company and the team, and that would be something where we want to hear about the company and the team. And if part of that story has to do with that you are from one of those groups, it's definitely, I think, something that tends to be positive to bring up in that whatever context you think is most appropriate.
So we just have a few minutes left. I'll try to sort through what we have here, and then I have one more question at the end. So I'm going to reserve time for myself.
The moderator's prerogative.
That's right. How are collaborations with universities formed for the purposes of the SBIR or STTR program? And how is IP split in those cases?
Yeah, so for all of these projects, whether it's SBIR or STTR, The small business is the awardee entity. That's where the NSF award goes, and that's where the relationship exists with NSF. So for any of these programs, if you have a university or another institution that is part of the project, it's up to you to manage that relationship. And we are going to deal with you, and we're going to trust you to deal with your partners. So the legal answer to the IP disposition for any federal award is a law called the Bayh-Dole Act. BAY is B-A-Y-E, B-A-Y-H, in case you don't know how to spell it. And the Bayh-Dole Act basically says that under some fairly easy to achieve conditions, that the intellectual property that is developed during federal funding of some external party lies with the external party. And so in this case, the IP kind of by default is the property of the small business that we're funding. As far as your collaboration with the university, if it's up to you to decide based on signing some kind of agreement, and usually you are going to want to sign an agreement that disposes the IP if they're part of the project. That's up to you to decide how to actually dispose of the IP. In my experience, most universities want to have a pretty standard clause where employees of the university working on university facilities want to have ownership of the technology. As a program director, I am biased. I'm behind the small business. I want the small business to succeed, and the more IP that they have, the better. And so I favor having the IP as available to the small business as is possible. Let's put it that way. But understand that that's not always achievable. So we don't get involved as NSF in that negotiation. But without an agreement to the contrary, the Bayh-Dole Act basically says that, and I'm not a lawyer, so you should talk to somebody, but it basically says that the awardee, the prime awardee who the government is paying to do the research, essentially is the de facto controller of the resulting IP. And again, this only covers IP that directly arises based on our funding. Anything that you all come into the project with already is yours. It stays wherever it was. We don't put any claim to that.
What's the timeline for from submission to response on the review of a proposal?
It's typically about 6 months from tip to tail. It's probably the worst part of our process. Historically, before COVID, it was closer to between 4 and 5 months, and it's been very busy since COVID hit. I'm sure you understand that once all the eggheads got kicked out of their research labs, they went and started writing proposals. And so everybody in the government saw an upshift. So we're still a little bit behind our process, and we tend to be about 6 months from tip to tail. It doesn't mean you won't hear something before 6 months is up, but if you're going to get an award, 6 months is a good time to estimate in terms of planning when the work will be able to start.
Is there any problem taking investment from private or angels or VC or accelerator funds at the same time as you have an SBIR?
No, that's fine. There is a limitation on being, as I mentioned, you have to be majority owned by US-based individuals to be eligible. So theoretically, if you sold a majority of your shares to any institution, and VCs are all institutions, then that would make you ineligible. But in most cases, it'll take at least 2 and more likely 3 rounds of VC funding to become majority backed by VCs. So typically, raising a seed or a Series A is fine and won't affect your availability, your eligibility, I should say. I will say that we are looking for our funds to be impactful. Catalytic is the term that we use. And if you raise $3 million, then we can see that our funding would still be impactful. If you raise 35 million, it starts to be a question. We had an awardee recently who came to our phase 1, this event we have for our new phase 1 grantees, like 2 or 3 months into their phase 1 award, and they told their program director they just closed in a $52 million investment. That made the phase 2 conversation a little bit different. So we try to continue to support companies, even if they're successful in fundraising, because we don't want to punish success. But at the phase 1 stage, if you've got a war chest built up, then and you're competing against a company that doesn't have any resources, then we're going to tend to put our money where the funding is going to be the most impactful. But typically speaking, the amount of money you need to raise to start making our process less likely is enough that you probably don't want to change. You probably don't want to say no, is what I would say. So, so please don't let our process slow down what you think is a natural evolution and fundraising strategy for your company.
So last question, there's just 2 minutes left. So I'll try to be quick. So looking at the new solicitation, it looks like the broader impact section is longer now. You're looking for a longer response there. Is there more emphasis on this? And I don't know, whenever I write an NSF proposal, that's the hardest section to write, kind of. So can you speak to what you folks are looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I wouldn't read too much into that change of priorities. I mean, I think our priorities have been pretty consistent and remain pretty consistent. Broader impacts is one of our 3 key factors, right? So intellectual merit, which is roughly speaking technology innovation and technical competency and so on, and then commercial impacts, which is what you would get from any early stage investor. Most of it, it's pretty similar to what an investor would be looking at. And then broader impacts is the 3rd piece. You know, the reason we wanted to create a little more space for that section is that we've always known that the commercial impact is essentially a necessary condition for broader impacts at a small business, at a startup. None of our companies have really much impact at all without figuring out some business model that works for them, right? And so you can have commercial impact without broader impact, but you can't usually have the opposite. So we've focused a lot on commercial impact because it is it's required to go in to get anything else, to get intellectual merit, to get anything else. You need to have a company that's going to survive, basically. But we wanted to give people more chance because within the kind of range of companies that have a business model that is allowing them to keep the lights on, there's a huge variation in terms of the outcomes that they're looking to deliver and the ways that they can positively impact the economy, right? If your company is going to create a huge amount of tax revenue for the government, employ a lot of people, that's enough for us. You know, you don't necessarily need to have any broader story beyond the pure economics of the play. But if your company have maybe a very small market, a relatively small market, but if you're helping, you know, improve the quality of life of around a certain disease or around a certain condition, if you're helping to educate students, if you're helping to clean up the environment, I mean, those impacts are incredibly powerful. And so we don't want to make this a case where, you know, it's always a hard economic case. So the idea with broader impacts being a larger section is just to try to give folks a way to kind of explain the non-economic, non-Silicon Valley aspects of their company and what they can do if they get off the ground, so that we can consider all kinds of returns on investment as part of our portfolio.
So maybe what motivated them, or what they're really passionate about in their hearts for bringing this technology to practical use, right?
I mean, that's a great point as well, right? So I mean, the broader impacts is a mirror you kind of put on the founding team, in some sense. I mean, the whole document reflects the founding team in these small startups, but the broader impacts is really, like you said, Roman, it is a Rorschach in some sense for these teams, because it allows, like you said, it gives them a space to talk about why they decided to do this very difficult thing in starting the company. Maybe that thing is just like, look, I want to compete, I want to make money, maybe there's a certain problem that they're passionate about, that they have a personal reason to be passionate about. Those things are all really important to know because they do matter when things get tough with the company. Having a really strong intrinsic reason to keep going is a very powerful way to make companies successful. So yeah, we encourage folks to really be themselves and to be personal if they need to in that section, because it is something that, and by the way, this applies to a lot of early stage investors as well. I'm sure you all know that that's one of the things they really look for, is that personal connection, that they understand the person that they're funding and what makes them tick.
Well, we're out of time, and I apologize that there's a few questions that we didn't quite get to. We'll try. Lisa, can you take a screenshot or a copy of those, and we'll try to get answers to the people.
I also have a general email address for our program on my slide, but let me throw my my personal email address into the chat in case folks want to do it that way as well. Okay. I think I can do that.
Well, Ben, while you're doing that, want to thank you so much. It's really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. It's great to see you. Maybe we'll see you again in person. It's been a few years, I guess. So,
I would love to get up there. Yeah, that's my old stomping grounds, as we mentioned. So hope to see everybody in person. But in lieu of that, let's reach out and let's set up a Zoom, and happy to chat with anybody.
okay, great. And Lisa did put the PDF of the slide deck in chat. So you can grab it directly from there, or if you need to, just send us a note at ICorps@mit.edu. So if you don't have anything else, Ben, I'd like to say thanks and have a great evening, and we can wrap it up.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Roman. Appreciate it.
Thank you.